Dobro. History. Archive.
Welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are strapping in for a story that is truly a statistical anomaly. It's a narrative so improbable it almost defies the laws of physics, yet it is utterly, demonstrably true.
It really is. We're talking about Christmas Eve, 1971, high above the Peruvian Amazon.
Right, and the core event is just. It's a moment of unadulterated catastrophe. Lands of Flight 508, a Lockheed L-188A Electra, was violently ripped apart in midair.
Falling from an altitude of up to 21,000 feet. I mean, the numbers are just brutally final.
Yeah.
92 people on board, 91 perished.
The single survivor, a 17-year-old Juliane Koepcke who plunged into the jungle still strapped to her seat bench.
And that, astonishingly, is just the beginning of the story.
It's barely the prelude.
Exactly. The survival of the fall was, just the opening act. If the crash itself was an aerodynamic miracle, then the next 11 days were a triumph of applied biology and profound human resilience.
So we're moving far beyond just calling it luck.
Far beyond. This deep dive is about synthesizing the cold data, the severe weather, the physics of the freefall, the systemic failure of the airline, with the crucial physiological and psychological dimensions of survival.
And our sources paint a really clear picture here.
They do. Juliane's specific, customized education in one of the world's most intense ecosystems was the critical differentiator. It was the thing that separated life from death.
Okay, so let's unpack this. Our mission today is to move beyond that headline, girl survives plane crash. We're going to explore the precise convergence of mechanical failure, atmospheric violence, and crucially, specialized human training. We are examining how this very specific biological literacy allowed her to navigate the so-called green hell.
Right. Not as an impenetrable obstacle, but as a readable, navigable environment.
This is a story about the ultimate value of knowing your world, down to the smallest, most vital detail.
To understand how she did it, how she survived 11 brutal days with severe injuries, no food, no gear, completely alone, you really have to go back years earlier.
You have to understand that she wasn't just a passenger. She wasn't a tourist flying home for Christmas.
No. She was, for all intents and purposes, a jungle child, trained by two absolute world-class scientific minds.
And this is where it gets really, really interesting.
Absolutely. The entire foundation of her survival was laid long before she ever boarded that plane. We're talking about the Koepcke legacy.
Yeah.
I mean, a truly unique scientific pedigree.
Her parents, Hans Wilhelm and Maria Koepcke, they were preeminent German zoologists.
And they weren't just academics. They were completely immersed in their field. Maria was a highly distinguished ornithologist specializing in the birds of the neotropical region.
Which is an incredibly diverse field.
Incredibly. And her father, Hans Wilhelm, was an ecologist and biologist dedicated to the broader neotropical fauna. They didn't just study this from a university thousands of miles away.
No, this was their life. They lived it.
They did. And that dedication materialized in 1968 when the family established Penguana, a biological research station deep, and I mean deep, within the primary rainforest of the Sierra Mountains.
So this wasn't some holiday home.
Not at all. This was their operational base. For nearly 2 years, this complex, biodiverse jungle was Juliane's extended home. It was her schoolhouse. She was educated there, immersed in the daily rhythm of the forest.
So this upbringing created what our sources call her survival epistemology. Now, that's a heavy-duty term. Can you break that down for us?
Sure. So epistemology is just the theory of knowledge, how we know what we know, right?
Right.
Her survival epistemology, then, is a cognitive reframing of her environment. Think about the average person from, say, Europe or North America. Our media, our literature, it portrays the Amazon as the green hell.
Chaotic, hostile, and impenetrable wall of green, full of hidden dangers.
Exactly. So if you drop an untrained person into that, their panic index just skyrockets. Their brain registers nothing but chaos.
They see 1,000 potential threats and they freeze.
Precisely. But Juliane, she was trained to see it completely differently. She saw a structured habitat. To her, the jungle wasn't random. It was a complex, interconnected system with discernible rules, predictable patterns, and crucially specific resources.
So seeing structure instead of chaos, that's the key.
It's everything. That cognitive framework drastically reduced her panic index. It allowed her to apply logic instead of just reacting purely to fear.
That distinction, structured habitat versus chaotic hell, that seems like the most profound insight here. It implies that if you know the rules of the system, you can actually exploit them for your survival.
You can.
So what were those specific rules? What was the life-saving curriculum she actually relied on when she woke up alone on the forest floor?
Well, the most foundational and ultimately the most life-saving lesson her father ingrained in her was hydrological navigation.
Hydrological navigation.
The axiom was just elegantly simple, but it was perfectly tailored for a dense environment where you can't see the sun or the horizon. It was, water flows to streams, streams flow to rivers, and rivers lead to civilization.
That's elegant simplicity in the face of absolute complexity. She didn't need a compass. She didn't need a GPS. She just needed to follow the sound of water.
Exactly.
But that sounds inherently risky, doesn't it? I mean, did the sources mention any instances where following water actually led her into new dangers, like waterfalls or treacherous banks?
That's an excellent point, and a necessary one. The axiom is about following the course of the water, not necessarily staying in the water itself.
I see.
She was taught to walk along the streams where she could, using them as a guide. But, the canopy was so dense, she often had no choice but to wade through the shallower parts.
And accept the risks, like stingrays or submerged logs.
Because the alternative, trying to hack through the undergrowth, was just too exhausting for an injured person, and it would hide even greater dangers like pit vipers. The mantra she kept repeating to herself was her constant instruction. If you get lost in the jungle and you find flowing water, then stay near it, follow its course. It will bring you to other people.
It gave her a simple, actionable goal. It prevented that paralyzing indecision.
It did. And beyond just navigation, survival depends on avoiding those debilitating or fatal errors. Which brings us to threat assessment.
Right. How did her training allow her to tell the difference between the Hollywood threats and the actual immediate dangers?
She had the biological literacy to understand animal behavior. For instance, the jungle is crawling with Cayman's alligators, which are, terrifying to look at.
Absolutely.
But she knew they rarely attacked people who were moving or standing on land. And piranhas, which are always sensationalized, were generally not a threat to a moving human in a large river unless, they were stationary and bleeding from open wounds.
So that knowledge allowed her to save precious energy. She could choose the most efficient path, overriding that primal, instinctual fear.
Right. It allowed her to actually use the river for travel, which was much easier than walking, rather than being paralyzed by the fear of creatures that weren't actively hunting her.
What about the smaller, more insidious threats? Spiders, scorpions?
Her training covered these practical safety protocols that seem minor, but are absolutely essential. She knew she had to shake out her boots every single morning.
Why?
To dislodge venomous spiders, scorpions, or even small snakes that might have crawled inside overnight for warmth. An untreated bite in that environment is a death sentence.
And that action was automatic for her, a reflex, not something she had to panic about.
Exactly. The level of discipline is just incredible for a teenager, especially one suffering from a severe concussion and broken bones.
And it wasn't just visual assessment. The sources highlight auditory mapping as well, which became absolutely crucial when her eyesight failed her.
Yes, and this is where the specificity of her parents' expertise really shines. She lost her glasses in the fall, so her vision was severely impaired.
The world was just a green blur.
A debilitating green blur. She had to rely on sound. Auditory mapping meant she was trained to recognize very specific local bird calls. For example, she recognized the distinct, almost rattling call of the hoatzin.
The hoatzin, what does that signify?
The hoatzin is this peculiar, almost prehistoric-looking bird that nests exclusively near open water and marshes.
So hearing that call meant she was definitely on the right track, even if she couldn't see the stream through the dense canopy.
Exactly. It was confirmation. It sustained her resolve when she was dizzy and starting to hallucinate. It turned the overwhelming, chaotic noise of the rainforest, the buzzing, the calls, the unseen animals, into meaningful, directional data.
It provided cognitive certainty.
It reduced the terror of the unknown, that knowledge, that preparation. It was the absolute antithesis of the random chance that characterized the disaster itself.
And as profound as her preparation was, the survival story is just inextricably linked to the institutional negligence that caused the catastrophe in the first place. We have to look at the operator. Líneas Aéreas Nacionales S.A. Lanza. This wasn't just some unfortunate accident, was it?
Not at all. It was a disaster waiting to happen. The history here is exceptionally grim. It's rooted in organizational dysfunction. By 1971, Lanza had already earned a notorious reputation for Egregious safety lapses and chronic mechanical unreliability.
And this wasn't just local gossip.
No, this was documented, systemic negligence, and it was driven by financial desperation.
We know her own family was aware of this. Her father, Hans Wilhelm, was so acutely aware of the risk that he actually warned his wife, Maria.
He did. He urged her, please fly with anyone else. That familial warning just underscores how widely known Lance's abysmal safety record really was, especially among educated locals who traveled a lot.
So the company culture was just rotten.
It was a culture of cutting corners, prioritizing schedule over safety. It's a classic case of what investigators call systemic rot. And this was demonstrated dramatically just a year earlier in August 1970.
Lance of Flight 502.
Also a Lockheed L-180A Electra. It crashed shortly after takeoff from Cusco, killing 101 people.
And what did the investigation into that crash reveal that pointed to the broader problems?
That crash was officially attributed to improper execution of engine-out procedures by the crew and critically endemic poor maintenance practices across the entire fleet.
So it wasn't just one technician having a bad day.
No, the findings pointed to a complete breakdown in standard operating and maintenance protocols. It was all designed to save money and keep these aging aircraft in the air. The Peruvian government even suspended their license for a while, but then they were allowed to resume operations.
Which basically just continued the high-risk environment. It's a crucial political and economic context. The airline's financial struggles were directly translating into mechanical risks for passengers.
And we see this reflected acutely in the specific aircraft used for Flight 508.
The plane registered as OBR 941.
Yes. This Lockheed L-180A Electra was literally the last operational one remaining in Lance's fleet after the previous year's tragedy.
And while the Electra was a rugged, reliable aircraft for other airlines,
this specific airframe had a highly dubious maintenance pedigree.
Our sources use a pretty disturbing metaphor for it. They describe it as being assembled entirely from spare parts of other planes.
The term used by some of the maintenance crews was the Frankenstein assembly.
Frankenstein.
Because Lanza was in such dire financial straits, they couldn't afford new certified parts, so they cannibalized components from grounded aircraft, effectively patching together a flyable but fundamentally structurally compromised plane.
And this would include essential parts, like hydraulic lines, wiring.
Everything. Structural elements that may not have been properly certified or stressed for continued flight.
And how did investigators confirm this Frankenstein assembly after the crash?
Well, the debris field, combined with what little maintenance logs they could recover, told the story. They found components with serial numbers that were inconsistent with the original airframe.
So parts had been salvaged from wreckage or other retired aircraft?
Exactly. The lack of standardized records, the evidence of hasty repairs, it all confirmed that the plane was inherently mechanically vulnerable. It was operating far, far outside recommended safety margins.
So you have a structurally weak aircraft. It's operated by a company with a documented culture of negligence. What happens when you combine that severe mechanical vulnerability with intense operational pressure?
You create a guaranteed high-risk scenario. I mean, the flight was fully booked. It was the peak lucrative Christmas holiday traffic.
So the pressure on the crew to meet that schedule, regardless of weather, would have been immense.
It amplified the danger exponentially. The mindset of the crew likely shifted from prioritizing safety and diversion to just adhering to the timetable. A mindset that became tragically deterministic on Christmas Eve.
Juliane was just 17. She'd celebrated her high school graduation the day before, flying home to Panguana.
And the accounts really emphasize her utter lack of preparation for what was about to happen. She was wearing a light, synthetic, sleeveless midi dress and sandals.
So now we cover the final, terrifying moments of the flight itself.
The departure from Lima was delayed, but the mood was initially festive, Christmas energy. But about 30 minutes into the flight, cruising at around 21,000 feet, the aircraft encountered a massive and highly dangerous meteorological event.
What exactly was this phenomenon they flew into?
It was the Intertropical Convergence Zone, the ITCZ, in its absolute full fury. For listeners who aren't familiar, you can think of it as this belt of low pressure near the equator where the trade winds meet. It generates colossal amounts of heat and moisture.
And when this zone is active, it produces these giant storm systems.
Giant is an understatement. Specifically, cumulonimbus clouds. They act like atmospheric superengines. These were not your average thunderstorms.
How big are we talking?
These storm cells were reaching incredible altitudes, up to 45,000 feet. They're characterized by violent vertical drafts, both updrafts and downdrafts, moving at extreme speeds, and just intense electrical activity.
A storm that should have been avoided at all costs.
at all costs.
Yeah.
But despite standard operating procedure dictating diversion, the pilots, under that scheduling pressure we talked about, they elected to fly directly through the heart of it.
And Julianne's recollection provides this visceral sense of how bad that choice was.
It does. She described pitch black clouds and the turbulence just escalating from discomfort to pure violence. She said, "It was pitch black all around us, and there was constant lightning. Luggage and Christmas presents started raining down from the overhead compartments as the plane began to just jump uncontrollably."
At precisely 12:36 p.m., the end came.
The sensory experience in the cabin transitioned from extreme turbulence to absolute terror. Juliane was sitting next to her mother, Maria, who offered the final, devastating prophecy. That is the end. It's all over.
In that instant, the mechanism of failure occurred.
A powerful bolt of lightning struck the right wing of the Lockheed Electra. And given that the wings contained the fuel tanks, the strike immediately ignited the fuel.
And the resulting explosion caused catastrophic structural failure.
The wings separated entirely from the fuselage.
It just tore off.
It did. And once the plane was rendered asymmetrical, the overwhelming aerodynamic forces at that speed and altitude caused the rest of the fuselage to disintegrate almost instantly. The cabin effectively just blew apart.
The moment of transition that Juliane described it's haunting.
It's profound. She recounted the deafening engine roaring that had filled her head just suddenly stopping. Total silence. She was outside the plane, strapped to her seat bench, hanging head over heels. The overwhelming, catastrophic noise was replaced by this unnatural, utter quiet. She described it as the whispering of the wind.
Ejected from a pressurized cabin at 21,000 feet and now just falling.
Analyzing this next part is really key to separating the myth of the miracle from the physical reality of the opportunity that aligned for her.
Right, because surviving a free fall from that altitude without a parachute is a near statistical impossibility.
It is. So we have to look at the highly specific, multifactorial physical explanation for how the final impact was mitigated. It required this unique convergence of factors.
So it wasn't just one piece of luck. It was a perfect, deadly cascade of physics and atmospheric factors that actually worked in her favor.
Exactly. Let's start with the unit she fell with. That itself was crucial.
Why did she survive when others who might have been ejected were killed instantly?
The unit provided stabilization and a surface area for drag. She was in row 19, and when the fuselage broke apart, that three-seat bench detached as a single intact unit. She remained securely strapped into the middle seat.
So if she'd been separated from the seat, or if the bench had broken up,
she would have accelerated into an uncontrolled tumble. It would have resulted in almost immediate incapacitation or death.
The sources refer to the stabilization of this bench as the maple seed aerodynamics. Now, that's a highly illustrative analogy, but can we get into the physics of what that rotation actually achieved?
So certainly. A maple seed, a Samara, it falls slowly because its asymmetric wing shape induces an auto rotation, like a little helicopter.
Right. It spins.
It spins. And simulations suggested that the asymmetrical weight and shape of that long seat bench, a wide base with three tall backs, induced a similar spin as it fell through the air.
And how does that spin translate into survival?
It was twofold and physically critical. First, the rotation dramatically increased its drag coefficient by constantly presenting a wider surface area to the airflow.
Okay.
Second, and most importantly, this increased drag dramatically reduced her terminal velocity. A human body in an uncontrolled free fall typically hits speeds of around 120 miles per hour. The kinetic energy on impact is lethal.
But the rotational element slowed her down.
Significantly. While we don't know the exact speed, estimations suggest it could have been reduced to maybe half that speed, which made the impact survivable, though still causing devastating injuries. The seat was a makeshift aerodynamic brake.
So the physics of the wreckage itself gave her a kind of drag parachute. But we also know that the very storm that destroyed the plane also played a role in slowing her descent further. An atmospheric cushion. That's a powerful paradox.
It is the ultimate irony. The cumulonimbus cloud was violent enough to tear the plane apart, but those same massive clouds generate these vertical columns of rising air updrafts that can move incredibly fast.
How fast are we talking?
We're talking air speeds that can reach 80 to 100 miles per hour.
Upwards. So she potentially fell into a column of air that was moving up, counteracting the pull of gravity.
That is the compelling hypothesis.
Yeah.
As she descended, she likely fell into one of these powerful updrafts. This rising air acted as a counterforce, essentially braking her velocity just as she reached the lower, denser atmosphere.
So she had 2 layers of drag mitigation, the seat's rotation and the storm's vertical thrust.
Exactly. But even a relatively slower impact from, say, 10,000 feet would still be fatal if she hit solid earth or a rock.
Absolutely.
And that brings us to the final and perhaps most vital factor, canopy deceleration.
She didn't hit bare earth.
No. She fell into the dense, multi-layered canopy of the primary rainforest. You have to think of the Amazon canopy not as a single roof, but as hundreds of feet of stacked vegetation. Towering trees, mid-level foliage, and then a dense understory of vines and lianas.
It acted like a progressive crumple zone in a car.
Precisely. The thick foliage, the lianas, the branches, the dense matting of leaves, it all acted to sequentially dissipate the kinetic energy over several meters of vertical distance. The seat bench caught on the vegetation, snapping branches, tearing leaves, slowly absorbing the impact shock until she lost consciousness and finally impacted the ground.
Still strapped to the seat.
Still strapped to the seat. She had survived a fall of thousands of feet due to this unique confluence of physical variables. The opportunity for life had been created. Now her biological resilience had to take over.
Juliane awoke on Christmas morning, dizzy, alone, and severely injured. The physics had granted her life. Now her specialized training had to sustain it.
And her initial assessment upon regaining consciousness, after being out for about 20 hours, was a display of remarkable focus, despite her physical state. She checked her wristwatch. It was still working. A small, tangible link back to normalcy.
But her physical condition was it was perilous. Let's detail those injuries again, because they really define the limits of her mobility and her vulnerability.
She had a severe concussion, which caused intense dizziness and periodic blackouts. The rapid depressurization and impact had burst capillaries in her eyes. Her right eye was swollen, completely shut. And crucially, she had lost her glasses.
And she was extremely myopic.
Right. So the jungle was literally a debilitating green blur. Orthopedically, she had a broken clavicle, a neck strain, a fissure in her shin bone, and a torn ACL in her knee. Every single movement was agony.
And the open wounds. A 4-centimeter gash on her arm and a deep cut on her calf. Just open invitations to infection in that environment.
Her first impulse was emotional. She called out for her mother, but the dizziness quickly overwhelmed her, and only silence answered. She did manage to find one piece of salvage from the wreckage.
A small bag of fruit drops.
That paltry bag of sweets would be her single, sole caloric source for the entire 11-day trek.
Days 2 and 3 brought a necessary reality check. She realized that the dense canopy that had cushioned her fall was also completely hiding her from the search planes she could hear flying overhead.
Waiting for rescue meant certain slow death. By starvation or exposure, she knew she had to move.
And that realization was reinforced by a truly harrowing discovery near the crash site.
She found a row of seats that had impacted the ground with unmitigated force. A bench, similar to hers, but one that clearly hadn't had the benefit of those same deceleration factors.
Her description is horrific. She found a row of seats drilled into the ground.
A stark visual of unmitigated impact. She said she recognized one victim only by their polished toenails, buried headfirst, with their legs just protruding from the mud. That undeniable, stark visual gave her the immediate galvanizing resolve she needed. It removed the option of giving in to grief or waiting for fate. She had survived the physics. Now she had to survive the biology. She located a small spring and committed entirely to her father's axiom: follow the water.
And from day 4 through day 9, the journey devolved into this brutal, relentless sensory and physiological challenge. How did she compensate for losing her glasses?
Without her glasses, she had to rely almost entirely on tactile sensation and auditory cues. The jungle was a terrifying, blurry smear. She was forced to adopt this incredibly slow, deliberate pace, carefully scanning the ground for the slightest ripple or difference in texture.
Looking for camouflage snakes.
Before every single step. And her auditory training was constantly engaged. She listened for the deep, resonant calls of the king vulture, a sign of carrion, which meant she was near wreckage or grimly other victims.
But also for the positive signs.
Right. She listened for the hoatzin, confirming she was near flowing water. This gave her constant low-level reassurance.
And beyond the immediate threats, the climate pressure must have been an absolute assault on her body, especially in just a thin synthetic dress.
It was an unrelenting battle. Oppressive heat during the day, leading to severe dehydration. But then the thin dress offered no protection during the chillingly cold nights. Constant rain led to skin maceration,
The breakdown of her skin.
making her wounds highly susceptible to infection, which was exacerbated by the constant pressure of insects.
And yet her knowledge gave her the confidence to take specific risks that would terrify an ordinary person. She often walked in the river. Why did she choose the water over the land?
It was a tactical choice born of knowledge. Walking in the water, despite the risk of stingrays or submerged logs, offered two huge benefits.
Okay.
First, temporary relief from the relentless insect pressure on the banks. Second, and more importantly, it allowed her to avoid the terrestrial dangers of the jungle floor, especially the venomous snakes that camouflage themselves perfectly among the roots and leaves.
And her knowledge of caiman behavior prevented that paralyzing fear.
Right. She saw one slide into the water, but maintained her resolve to keep moving. She could assess the threat profile and choose the path with the lowest overall risk.
But as the days wore on, the sweets ran out, and her body was simply burning through its reserves.
The decline was accelerating rapidly. She was running on pure physical reserve and mental conditioning. Severe dehydration and caloric deficit led to the onset of hallucinations. She started seeing rescue parties that weren't there, buildings that didn't exist.
Classic symptoms of extreme stress and starvation.
And this physiological stress brings us to the most visceral moment of the entire trek. The parasitic crisis.
The gash on her right arm.
Yes. The constant exposure of that 4-centimeter gash to the humid, fly-infested environment led to a massive infection of myiasis.
The parasitic infestation of flesh.
She became aware that flies had laid eggs, and the resulting maggots were actively living underneath her skin, feeding on her tissue, creating a gaping, deepening hole in her arm.
That is a massive psychological and physical threat. What was the immediate fatal risk of that condition out there?
The immediate risks were septicemia and tissue necrosis. The maggots, while initially eating dead tissue, quickly start consuming viable tissue, widening the wound and introducing bacteria.
And in that humid environment, infection would set in fast.
Rapidly. It would lead directly to blood poisoning or sepsis, which would have killed her within days. She was literally being consumed alive, and she knew she had neither the tools nor the strength to manually remove the dozens of parasites. She was desperate.
This brings us to day 10, the climax of her journey, where that applied knowledge from Panguana achieved a literal medical breakthrough in the fields.
It saved her life. After 10 days of near hallucination and excruciating pain, she found a definitive sign of humanity,
She stumbled upon a large boat moored at the riverbank.
which she initially feared was another mirage. She had to physically touch the solid wood to confirm it was real. Nearby, she found a small, open-air hut, a tambo used by Peruvian lumbermen.
And inside this hut, she found the tools for self-surgery, a jerry can of motor fuel, gasoline.
This is the critical moment of agency. The sight of the fuel triggered a specific life-saving memory from her childhood curriculum at Panguana.
What was the memory?
Her father had treated a serious maggot infection in their family dog using kerosene or gasoline. The fuel acts as a profound irritant. It suffocates the parasites and forces them out of the tissue so they can be removed.
But despite that knowledge, the execution, pouring raw gasoline onto an open, raw, infected wound would be agonizing.
It was excruciating. Juliane recounted the pain as searing, agonizing. But her will to live, driven by the memory of her father's successful treatment, it overruled the agony. She doused the wound liberally.
And it worked.
It worked. She recounted the horrifying efficacy later, stating, "I counted the worms when they started to slip out. There were 35 on my arm."
35. That desperate act was medically critical in preventing the severe, fatal infection that would have inevitably killed her.
It was a literal self-rescue. And furthermore, before she was found, she demonstrated that ingrained discipline one last time. Weakened and starving, she tried to catch frogs near the hut for food.
But she recognized them.
She recognized the bright coloration of the amphibians, identifying them as poison dart frogs. Even on the brink of collapse, that small piece of functional biological literacy saved her from a fatal mistake.
On day 11, the trek finally ended. She heard voices that were clearly not hallucinations.
3 Peruvian lumbermen emerged from the forest. Their initial reaction, though, was highly charged. Sources indicated deep-seated cultural tension.
What do you mean?
Well, in local Amazon mythology, a pale, blonde woman appearing suddenly from the deep jungle, or from the water, is often associated with the Yamanja or similar water spirits.
Which are considered dangerous omens.
Or supernatural entities. So their first reaction was fear and superstition. They hesitated.
But Juliane's fluency in Spanish immediately broke that tension.
It did. She addressed them directly, overriding the cultural fear with tangible reality. She said, "I am a girl who was in the Lanza crash. My name is Juliane."
That simple declaration of fact shifted the entire interaction.
It went from mythological dread to immediate human recognition. The men immediately provided rudimentary care feeding her cassava and confirmed her story via radio.
And then they transported her by canoe downriver.
A grueling 7-hour journey to a lumber station. From there, a quick 15-minute flight in a small aircraft to Koepcke, where she was finally reunited with her distraught father, Hans Wilhelm.
That reunion must have been so bittersweet, overshadowed by the uncertainty over her mother, Maria.
It was. But Juliane's account provided the first solid data for the search teams, allowing them to finally locate the main wreckage site deep in the jungle.
Which led to the heartbreaking truth about Maria Koepcke.
On January 12, 1972, search parties found her body. The investigation revealed that Maria had also survived the initial fall, but her injuries were far more severe. Too severe to move.
So she died days after the crash.
From injuries and exposure. Likely while Juliane was crawling through the jungle nearby. This reality became a lifelong source of profound trauma and survivor's guilt for Juliane.
And the systemic rot we discussed earlier. It finally resulted in institutional death for the airline.
The official investigation cited severe weather, the confirmed structural failure of the Frankenstein aircraft, and the fatal pilot error of flying into the storm. The evidence was irrefutable.
After the catastrophe of Flight 502 the previous year, this was the final blow.
It was. Lance's operating permit was formally revoked by the Peruvian government on January 4, 1972, just days after Juliane's rescue, and the company ceased all operations shortly thereafter.
A stark reminder of the danger of organizational negligence colliding with overwhelming natural forces.
Absolute.
Juliane's story has this unique link to cinema, and maybe more importantly, a powerful continuation in her scientific career. It proves that trauma doesn't always lead to aversion.
The link to film is one of the most incredible footnotes. It involves Werner Herzog, the eccentric German filmmaker.
Right. In a twist of fate that's just unbelievable, Herzog was in Peru scouting locations for his film 𝐏𝐻𝐃, The Wrath of God, and he was actually scheduled to be on Flight 508.
He was, but he was bumped. A last-minute change in itinerary, he missed the flight. He was deeply affected by the disaster.
And decades later, he returned to the subject.
In 1998, he located Juliane, now Dr. Juliane Diller, and convinced her to return to the crash site for his documentary, Wings of Hope.
That must have been an incredible, fraught journey back to that site. What was the focus of the documentary?
What's notable is that it refuses the sensationalism you often see. It focuses instead on the psychological landscape and the brutal reality of the details. Herzog uses Juliane's calm, almost clinical narration to reconstruct the experience. They visit the actual site where the wreckage still lies embedded.
So they discuss the specifics, the silence of the fall, the maggots.
All of it, grounding the survival story firmly in biological reality and cognitive application rather than just miraculous intervention.
And Juliane didn't let the trauma define her negatively. She returned to Germany, earned a PhD in biology, specializing in mammalogy, specifically bats.
She went on to work as a librarian at the Bavarian State Zoological Collection in Munich. She channeled her experience directly back into scientific dedication.
Her ability to find meaning and purpose through the lens of biology is just remarkable. Her relationship with the jungle remained one of respect and deep appreciation, not fear.
Right. She famously stated that some people think jungles are hostile environments, a green hell. But for her, it was the opposite. She said, "It saved my life."
That sentiment that the jungle was her savior is the ultimate testament to her family's work and her specialized education. The skills she learned there were the tools of her salvation.
And that legacy continues today through Panwana. Following her father's death in 2000, Juliane took over the directorship of the Biological Research Station. She significantly expanded its scope and protected area.
Using the global attention her story brought to secure its future.
Exactly. Today, Panguana is recognized by the Peruvian government as a large, critical, private conservation area. It's dedicated to biodiversity.
A living monument to her parents, to her own scientific dedication, and to the powerful environment that gave her the skills that were the ultimate difference between life and death.
So to synthesize this deep dive, Juliane Koepcke's survival was fundamentally a result of agency and preparation. It wasn't just passive luck.
Right.
While the physics of the fall, the seat auto rotation, the canopy cushion, provided the initial opportunity, The critical factor was her specific cognitive training from Penguana.
Her ability to assess threats, navigate by hydrology, avoid poisonous food.
And crucially, to execute that radical, painful self-treatment like the gasoline surgery, that was the sustained agency that allowed her to seize the opportunity and walk out alive.
This deep dive is such a powerful testament to the value of environmental literacy. When everything around her was designed to confuse and kill, Juliane's ability to recognize a structured habitat rather than a chaotic wall of green was life-saving.
That highly specialized knowledge, earned over years in the field, was her greatest piece of equipment.
We've seen how specific, applied knowledge about the Amazon ecosystem was the key differentiator between life and death for Juliane. Her story compels us to ask, what vital, practical piece of environmental or functional literacy are you currently missing in your own daily environment, whether it's urban, digital, or natural, that could make the critical difference in a moment of crisis? What are the rules of the system you inhabit, and are you prepared to apply them?